Teachers are the best people to transfer. You're using data currently already because you have to grade projects, you have to keep all scores, you have to calculate things at the end. Sometimes there's weighted scores, right? So all of this is considered to be data. Also, the fact that you're teaching others as a data professional, we're all teachers as well.
Welcome to the Data Career Podcast, the podcast that helps aspiring data professionals land their next data job. Here's your host, Avery Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of the Data Career Podcast. I am here today with Monica Royal, who is with Nerd Nourishment. She has a podcast called Data Podcast for Nerds, which I absolutely love because I am a nerd. Monica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Avery, for having me on the show.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk about your story because you have a very unique background where you were kind of in this IT/IS information systems world that I don't really understand. You were telling me it has a lot to do with security, risk, compliance, which we'll get into today. But I'm hoping to make today's conversation kind of resonate with those who might be in a similar field, who are kind of like in that IT/IS world and are like, oh, there's this sexy thing called data analytics. How do I transition into that? But not only for these people who are in IS and IT, but for anyone who's looking to pivot their career from, maybe something that isn't data analytics to data analytics. So I think you are a good person to talk about that because you went through that journey yourself. And then you also talk to people who go through similar journeys on your podcast as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So let's start like, what did you study in school?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Arizona and double majored in accounting and management information systems.
Okay, accounting. I know that's like taxes and stuff like that. Management information systems. What do they teach you in school for that?
Yeah, so that's the business version of computer science. So I started off with just getting my accounting degree, and I think like 3 years into it, I realized I kind of really don't like this. This isn't the path that I want to take, but I didn't want to jump ship and kind of, lose that time there. So I went to my counselor and was like, hey, what can I do? This is what I do like. I liked computers at the time, and they introduced me to the management information system. So I did take some programming. We learned Java, and we also learned about databases at a very high level, and then kind of a merge of accounting systems and how systems work on a level of like, this is how things should work in an organization for things to run smoothly.
All right. So basically like business IT stuff. And that's what you're studying in school. And then you graduate and what do you start doing?
Yeah, so I graduated and I went to an accounting firm. Specifically, I was doing security auditing. So we would test certain things in a business to make sure things were running appropriately, safely, securely, so that the business operations worked as intended.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to dive a little bit deeper into that security auditing. So when you say you were testing different things in the business, can you give maybe one or two examples of what those things were?
Absolutely, yeah. So everybody knows what passwords are to log into your computer, log into your systems, and all of that. There are certain requirements that you need to meet, whether it be like 12 characters, numbers, symbols, and all of that. That's actually coded on the back end for those requirements. So we had to go into those systems, make sure those were coded appropriately to meet certain requirements, because as an auditor, you're usually working with a lot of regulatory requirements. So there are certain, those compliance regulations that you needed to meet. And passwords are one of them, being the 12 characters, et cetera. So we had to check and make sure that those were configured appropriately.
Okay, so that makes sense that like for instance, a bank, you want to make sure all of the employees, it was from the employees' perspective, right? Or is it from the customers of like a bank?
It was actually for both.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, like with the bank, there's lots of money involved. You want to make sure that your passwords are secure for your customers and for your employees, because you don't want any hackers going into any customers' accounts stealing their money, and you don't want any hackers going into any of the employees and moving money nefariously from one place to another. And so as an auditor, you'd come in and basically like just double check to make sure all of that is tip top and they're up to code with all the password rules and regulations.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, awesome.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
how long did you do that for?
I was a security auditor kind of on and off throughout my entire career. The thing about being an auditor, people are scared of you. They don't like you around. They get nervous, right? Because we're there to kind of tell you you're doing things right or wrong. And so they get really nervous. And I didn't enjoy that sometimes. So I would go into the business and work in the business space. I did some governance work and some analytics work in the business. And then I kind of came back to audit and then went back to the business in the risk field. And then now I'm on my own.
Okay, let's talk a little about some of those buzzwords that you say that I don't necessarily know 100% what they mean. So, what does governance mean to you, or what did it mean to you in that role?
Yeah, so in that specific role, we were trying to roll out a system called Calibra, which was just a way to kind of put a catalog on your data within your company. Data dictionaries were involved, right? Kind of to get an inventory of what data existed where and who was kind of like the owners, the stewards of that data, so that when people were working with that data, they knew who to go to get explanations of that data. So I know you've probably come up across this where you're working with data as an analyst, right? And you're like, oh, what does this field mean, right? Who do you go to ask who it means or what it means, right? Specifically, like there's a well-known example of like customers. You're trying to figure out the question, how many customers exist within an organization, right? And when you ask different departments, every department has a different number and a different description or definition of what a customer even means. So having that overall governance, data dictionary, data catalog is really important in an organization.
So basically, that governance part was just making sure that everyone, it was clearly stated what this column and this data set meant, like if it was a time, like what the time exactly was, maybe whether it was clean or not. It was just basically like going through basically every column of every data set and saying this is what it represents and this is not what it represents.
Yes, it was very, very difficult job to have, as you can imagine, because there's a lot of data at a company.
It does sound hard, but at that point it sounds like you're kind of in the data world. So how did you go from like this security auditor where you're like just kind of looking at people's like passwords, making sure they're up to code, to landing like this more data role?
Yeah, yeah. So I think I was around 3 years into my career, and we were doing these manual checks, these manual compliance regulatory checks, make sure all the T's were crossed, I's were dotted. And I was like, man, this is interesting work, but there has to be an easier way to do it. And I kind of stumbled across what we all know is data analytics. And I took a couple courses on Coursera to learn more about it. And I kind of had like a light bulb moment like, hey, we can actually be using data in our work as a security auditor to make the tests more automated. And so at that time, I went to my manager with a proposal. I'm like, hey, manager, this is what we can do. I think we can make our lives a lot easier. And he let me roll with it. He's like, okay, figure it out, put together a project with, an MVP and bring it back and we'll see how that goes. And I did that and ended up creating a whole little sub department within the analytics department or within the audit department that focused strictly on analytics.
So you basically were taking stuff that you were doing in Excel and doing it faster. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? Or
Yes and no. So what I ended up doing is I was taking courses that were related to our programming. And so everything that we were doing in Excel, I kind of, you know, spit it out and started automating it with R. And so all of these manual checks that we would have to do, we would have to make sure certain requirements were happening, right? Within programming, whether that be R or Python, you can actually build out those specific business requirements and then just feed in that data and then it spits out those results. Another thing with auditing is a traditional way to audit not only is manual, also is limited. So you can't test, your million records at once, right? That's just impossible. So depending on the amount of population that you have, you only selected like a certain percentage. It was always 40 for some reason, right? So we had 40 records that we would have to go through manually. And then what you did from the results of that is then extrapolated those to the entire
Mm.
population to then figure out, are we good or not? Did we meet these regulatory compliances, right? That didn't jive with me very well either, because as an auditor, you always either picked everything that failed or everything that did not fail. So for me, it just didn't make sense. But when I learned about the data analytics, I was like, hey, you can literally feed in your million records and it spits out an exact result of how well your business is doing.
That makes sense because yeah, it is hard to do things at scale in Excel. It just kind of crashes and burns and destroys
Mm-hmm.
your computer. But doing things in a programmatic language just allows you to kind of do everything all at once. I mean, it can still take a while to crunch the numbers, but it's not really going to fail
Yeah,
as quickly as Excel. So it allowed you to be more complete with your audits and to do it in a more automated fashion, it seems like.
absolutely.
Oh, nice. So that was kind of your first taste of, oh wow, I can do cool things with, programming. And interestingly, you chose R for that. Then where do you go from there? Like you're like, oh, I kind of like this. You're kind of in this little team. What happens next?
Yeah, so that's when I kind of started bouncing around from audit to the business just because I wanted to understand more about data, what was available out there. That's when I learned about that governance team. And then I went back to auditing at a different company where they were already using analytics. They had a whole pipeline already developed and everything. So I was like, oh, I want to see what an already run team, how that works, because the team that I was in, I personally built myself, which was amazing. But I kind of was curious about what an already established team looked like. So I went to that company and that was really cool. I learned new tools. We started using SQL to obtain the information. It wasn't so much Excel anymore. So I learned SQL. Also, we were using Tableau to visualize our stuff. And then it got to a point where I was using Python as well for a couple machine learning projects. So,
Okay, very nice. That's super cool. And then you're like fully transitioned in and you're fully doing like analytics, which is super neat. So
yeah.
that's like your journey of going from like this informations systems, auditing, security, risk space to, an analytics professional, which is absolutely neat. What do you think like set you up for success the most in that transition?
I 100% think that it was my manager because I was scared to even ask, like, hey, I have this idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but in my head, I think this is the bee's knees and I want to see if this is going to happen, right? And he was like, yes, go for it. Let's see what happens. And it got to the point where we built out that sub department. And that was all because I asked my manager and my manager supported me.
I do think that the manager does deserve some credit and claps to the manager, but
Yeah.
you also have to ask, you have to have like that inquisitive mind and be brave and be like, my manager might think I'm an idiot and might reject this. So don't count yourself out of that credit because you still had to make that ask. And of course the manager deserves credit for, helping you with that, but you still have to say, ask the question, come up with the idea and ask the question. So Give
That's true.
yourself
And
some credit.
also thank you. Also, I think that kind of set me up for not being scared to ask silly questions anymore, because that was probably the first most bizarre question that I thought I had at the time. And so now whenever I'm curious about anything or I'm just want something to happen, I'll reach out and I'll ask. I mean, I get shot down a lot of times, but at least I asked, because then I'm not going to sleep at night like, oh, I wonder if.
I love that. I'm still not good at this, but like I think there's two different types of regrets in life. There has to be like some language out there that has a different word for each one of these regrets. But there's regrets of things that you didn't do and regrets of things that you did do. And I think that we're always like scared to like ask the question or to, ask the person on a date or to like, go out and do something crazy. But really, I think that most regrets, like when we're on our deathbeds and we're all gonna die someday, right? Like I think most of the time people regret stuff that they didn't do. They rarely regret stuff that they do. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who've done, evil, not good things that they regret doing. But like I think like from a professional standpoint, a lot of the times, like even if I've made mistakes in my life, but like I took the chance, I'm glad that I did it because that way at least I know what the outcome was versus I think I would regret like, oh, what would have happened if I did this? It's hard to know sometimes. So I think that's like a skill that you can kind of develop and maybe a mindset that you can kind of grab. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I wanted to ask you or I wanted to highlight here is you have what I would actually call like an internal transfer or an internal pivot where your first data job was actually the job you already had. You just kind of turned it into a data job through doing something a little bit different, using a data tool, talking to your manager, and that was kind of the catalyst for your data career pivot. Do you think that like other people can do the internal pivot as well?
Yes, 100% yes. As a matter of fact, I built out a data strategy program that helps people do just that. So I kind of share my story of using data where you're at currently. And then if you want to transfer to a different company, a different department, you can do that. But the reason why I kind of highlight like try it out where you're at first is, that's how I did it, but also it's a way to actually figure out if you even like data in the first place, right? Because some people, they're just like, this is the fancy buzzword of the day, I just want to go for it, they'll quit their job and then they're like, I don't know what to do next, right? But in this way you're able to start doing it without moving anywhere, figure out if you like data. Then at the same time, you can kind of build out different projects, build out different experiences, real life experiences, hands on. And that gives you a better leverage if you did want to then transfer departments, transfer companies.
That's really key because like especially it can be quite both time and financially expensive to pivot your career. And if you pivot your career into something you don't even like, that's kind of a waste. So seeing if you like it at your current job is really important. Now I didn't prepare you for this, but I'd like to play a game with you if you're open to it. And that
I'm
is
down.
okay, it's kind of an impromptu game, but like what if I give you a job title here and you could kind of say how they could possibly use analytics at their job? What do you think?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, maybe I'll try. Yeah, okay. Ready? Here we go. So let's talk about a teacher. Do you think a teacher can use analytics at their job?
Teachers are the best people to transfer. So you're using data currently already because you have to grade projects, you have to keep all scores, you have to calculate things at the end. Sometimes there's weighted scores, right? So all of this is considered to be data. Also, the fact that you're teaching others as a data professional, we're all teachers as well. So when we're giving presentations or sharing our projects with others, we have to basically teach others, say, like how to use our products, right? I never have built a dashboard and kind of threw it over the fence. I always sit down with the stakeholders and kind of say, hey, this is what we built out, this is how you use it, are there any questions, working and teaching along the way. So
Okay.
yes, teachers are actually the best people to transfer into data.
I, I like it. I agree. I think teachers make great data analysts. I have another profession in mind, but I wanted to make it an equal opportunity game. If you wanted to name a profession for me to do, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't taking all the heat. So you can either name a profession or you can say I'm ready for the next one.
I can quiz you.
Okay, go ahead. Give me a profession. Let's see if I can do as good of a job as you did on the last one.
Farmer.
Ooh, farmer. I actually think data in agriculture is getting bigger and bigger, like on a big scale. But let's just say you're Joe Farmer and you don't have like all these crazy things. One of the biggest things I think in farming is actually your water use. I'm pretty sure that that's obviously really important for the environment because I think they actually use water quite a bit in agriculture and farming. And I'm also guessing it's one of the bigger expenses. I don't know if that's true, but since they're using so much of it, I would imagine it gets expensive. And so like managing that properly is probably really key. So one of the things that, I've actually done on a small scale of my farming is I had this Arduino, which is basically, are you an Arduino fan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm a big Arduino fan too. For those who don't know what it is, it's basically like, it's like a microchip. It's like a little tiny computer without a screen. Picture like just like I don't know, PCB board. What is that even called? Like in layman's terms,
Circuit board.
a circuit board. Yeah, picture a circuit board, and basically it can think like a computer. And I actually hooked up a moisture sensor to it, and so basically it would tell me. I plugged it into my plant, and it would tell me how wet or how dry the moisture was. And I actually hooked it up the rest of the Arduino to a pump, a water pump, like a water bottle. And so basically when the liquid or like the moisture level fell to a certain area, it would automatically be detected and it would pump some water into the plant. Now that's not exactly data analytics, that's really just like programming, to be honest, but I'm sure you could do a lot around that and like trying to optimize the perfect amount of water or optimize the amount of water to lower costs but to have a good crop. That's my thoughts. What do you think? How did I do?
Perfect.
Perfect is too generous there. I did okay, maybe at best. Okay, I got one more for you. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, it's hard though. Are you ready?
Okay.
Actually, you want a hard one? Is that okay?
Sure.
I we're recording this on a Friday, and today is my garbage can day. So I put my garbage cans out front, and so I'm gonna do garbage truck driver.
Garbage truck driver.
How do they use data, or how could they use data? I think this is a hard one. So I'm not even sure how I would answer it. So I'm kind of being unfair, but it's what came to my mind.
So the first thing that popped in my head was route optimization, right? Because it's a very boring job, so they probably want to get it done as fast as possible. So then, what is the best route to be able to pick up the most cans in the least amount of time? There's something around, what is it? Don't make left turns or only make left turns, right? And so that's a thing to kind of understand. And then also, like, trash cans are on both sides of the streets, right? So you have to go through a street twice. But what is the best way to do it? Do you do one circle? Do you do a whole huge circle around the neighborhood? So that's my example, is the route optimization.
I think that's probably the best example and use case, really, which hopefully the garbage truck drivers aren't doing it themselves necessarily. Like, hopefully there's software that does this type of thing for them. But the point here is no matter what you're currently doing, there's an opportunity for you to use data at your job. There may be even an opportunity for you to, you know, pivot your current role to a different role within your company and use data. And I think that's actually both how Monica and I landed in data was that internal pivot. So it's something that's very valuable because at the end of the day, anytime you're transferring careers, it's going to take some trust from the person who's hiring you, because it's like, well, what credentials do you have? You didn't go to school for this. You've never done this before. How can I know that I can trust you? And when you're trying to get hired by like some random company, they don't really know you, but your current company doesn't know you, your current manager knows you, and they like you, they trust you. And so if you kind of get a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt when you're trying to do that pivot internally. I don't know if that was the case for you, but that was the case for me.
Yeah, same.
It's a great move. So I guess Monica and I are challenging you guys right now as you're listening to think, how can I use analytics where I'm at right now? And, how could I possibly transfer into that role? You've had the opportunity to do a lot of one-on-one calls with people going through this. You've also interviewed quite a few people with different professions on your podcast. Is there any themes that you'd say have stood out in those conversations?
That's a good question. I have seen a few themes. One theme being you kind of always gravitate back to your childhood dreams, right? So I, growing up, always wanted to be a teacher, and I somehow am now an instructor at LinkedIn Learning, and officially, data professionals are also teachers. So it's just one of those things that you always wanted to do. I also grew up making lists and whatnot, and we all, as data professionals, love lists. A lot of people on my podcast, they same, baseball cards. They really, really liked baseball cards coming up, and they would analyze all of the stats that were on those baseball cards. And then they kind of then transferred into a data professional. They didn't start out as a data professional, though, right? Musicians, music teachers, I had a few of those on my podcast as well, being the teachers themselves transferring over, but also having that music background translates in the fact of like understanding trends and how things flow into each other. That's kind of that transferable skill into data.
I love that. I think that's so cool. And I mean, at the end of the day, we all just want to be what we wanted to be when we were little kids. So
Yeah.
uh, I think that's fantastic. Monica, where can people go to learn more about, this internal pivot and how they can do analytics where they're currently at?
Yes. So I am very active on LinkedIn. And so I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube where all of my data podcast episodes are there. So LinkedIn and YouTube.
Perfect. We'll have those links in the show notes down below. Monica, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so very much, Avery.